Cities and towns dealing with floodwaters in eastern Canada are preparing for the worst. Across Quebec, Ontario, and New Brunswick, residents, emergency workers, and volunteers are scrambling to fill sandbags to hold back rising water levels. But heavy rain is in the forecast. Montreal is the latest municipality to declare a state of emergency.
But with the rain that is coming, we expect that we may have a rise in the water level. So if we have that increase, that may produce some pressure on the dikes. So we're aware that maybe some dikes won't be able to stand that pressure. And if we have some dikes that are overflowed or that could break, that would mean that we will have a lot of water in many streets that could bring us to think to evacuate some part of Pierrefonds or Ile Bizarre.
Ottawa is also in a state of emergency. Nearly 400 troops from the Canadian Armed Forces have been deployed to the worst-hit parts of the city. Officials have just delivered an update on the situation at Ottawa City Hall, and that's where we find the CBC's Matthew Kupfer. Hey, Matthew, thanks for being with us again. Let us know what the latest is from the city. What information did they just provide?
Well, city officials are warning residents of the West Carleton community, that's in the west end of Ottawa, to be prepared to evacuate. They say that in the last 24 hours, the situation, the forecast has been changing so rapidly that they're looking that some residents may have to leave their homes. So as they tell them to pack their bags, what's changed in the forecast is yesterday we were looking at water levels being about 11 centimeters above the 2017 flood peaks. Now that was a major flood that put 500 homes at risk and severely damaged hundreds. Now they're saying that the water levels could be as high as 50 centimeters above that 2017 peak. That's half a meter. So a lot more water, it could mean a lot more roads are covered in water, and that it would be much more difficult for emergency crews possibly to access those residents. City Manager Steve Kanalakis is saying, people see those images of Canadian forces or American emergency crews rescuing people from flooded homes, but what that amounts to is a serious diversions of resources that could be going elsewhere. So the city is asking, it can't order people to evacuate their homes, but it's asking residents to be prepared to evacuate, and that we may see that call for a voluntary evacuation this weekend.
And what about...
We've all seen the pictures, in across Canada and the States where people have been rescued out of their homes with special rescue teams because they've stayed too long. And when that happens, you're basically diverting critical resources we need for everyone else because someone chooses to stay. And I think the most pragmatic thing is for people to leave. And I know it's a hard decision, but when their safety is at risk, we believe when public safety is at risk to themselves, that's the line that we believe will be crossed.
And we mentioned off the top there, Matthew, that 400 members of the military have been deployed to help. Can you talk a little bit about the work that's underway as far as they're concerned?
Well, we saw this morning into the Dunrobin Constance Bay community, that community that may be looking at an evacuation, a call for voluntary evacuation. There were armored vehicles rolling into town. They were there as Premier Doug Ford was meeting with residents who have been affected by the floods. A member of the military was here speaking on behalf of the Royal Canadian Regiment that's leading that immediate response. What the city is saying is that basically the military is providing that extra manpower at a crucial moment where city crews and volunteers have been working all month basically in preparation for the spring thaw, knowing that flooding levels were expected to be high and that they're exhausted. And so the military is stepping in at a moment where people are emotionally raw and physically tired, and they're helping with those sandbagging operations, reinforcing sandbag barriers, as well as providing protection for critical infrastructure. We learned in the update this afternoon that one Ottawa water treatment facility is actually at risk of a washout on the road that leads to that facility, and that the military is providing protection for that roadway to make sure that critical chemicals can be shipped into that water treatment facility so that people will have safe drinking water in the city of Ottawa.
All right, thank you very much for that update, Matthew. Really appreciate it. That's the CBC's Matthew Cooper for us at Ottawa City Hall. With Ottawa facing record high water levels, as Matthew said, they're expecting they were expecting yesterday 11 centimeters above 2017 levels. Now they're expecting about half a meter higher than what the city saw last year, which saw 500 homes damaged. Since they're expecting so much more, what is the worst case scenario, and is the city prepared for it? George DeRuse is an Ottawa City Council and Deputy Mayor, and City Councillor, and Deputy Mayor. He joins me now from City Hall. Hi, Councillor DeRuse. Thank you very much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Councillor, I just listened to the press conference that you and a number of other officials from the city gave, and you spoke about the fact that there is no sort of ability for the city to compel people to leave their homes, but there might be a point at which voluntary evacuation is necessary, and you said if that evacuation doesn't happen, there could be, quote, real repercussions. What does that mean?
Well, the thing is, what we're trying, it's a voluntary evacuation, so our resident can, we will go to the door to door and we'll ask them to leave. And we've done that back in 2017, and we realized that our resident well educated and they realized that it's the best for their interest and safety. So because what happened is if they don't evacuate, then we have no ability to reach out to them for an emergency case, or the road could be washed. So there is a lots of element, not only because we need them to evacuate. On top of that, also we have to cut the power and the gas when the water reaches a certain level.
Tell us a bit about your expectations, because it's startling. I mean, what you were saying in the press conference is essentially that you're expecting it to be worse than you thought it would be 24 hours ago, and a lot worse than what happened in 2017. What does that mean in sort of tangible terms?
See, what happened is we have a benchmark in 2017, so we know where the water risen to which level it's. And from our partner right now, and from what we're getting from Environment Canada and the rain that we're going to receive by tomorrow, the expectation that we're going to bypass that level by lots. And I don't have an exact number. We started it yesterday at 11 centimeter, but right now we're talking way over that number. So if that's the case, we're not prepared for that amount of water in the houses to be flooded. So we have to find different solution. You have to realize that our residents started this process, and the City of Ottawa working with them since April 4. They are exhausted. People are tired. There is emotion on the ground. And when we toured this morning the ground with the premier and with the media, you can see it in their eyes. So sometimes if you're not really, if the residents are not really doing, they're tired and they're emotionally drained, they're making wrong decisions. So we need to make sure we get them safety. So that's why we're doing this evacuation, because we understand and we know some area we're not going to be able to save. Just
really quickly, when you say that it's too much, I only have a few seconds left. Do you need more help from the provincial government? Do you need more help from the military? Or are you anticipating that in the next 24 hours you will need more help, period?
The help is there. The help is on the ground. We have the military on the ground. We have the community volunteer. But the problem is the amount of water that it's coming. It's exceeding what we were thinking that it's going to come.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Councillor. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vash. Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, over in New Brunswick, officials say Fredericton's water levels have been slowly dropping over the past couple of days, but they could rise again because of rain in the forecast this weekend.
Jeez, my yard is full of water right now. It's not as bad as last year. Makes it no less stressful.
More than 25,000 sandbags have been handed out so far, and more than 100 roads have been affected. Many of those have been closed. There's no word at this point when they'll reopen. Close to 1,000 people have registered with the Red Cross, but the agency is still helping families affected by last year's flood. The Governor General visited the St. John area today, one of the hardest hit regions, where she met with emergency workers and soldiers helping the community. And in Quebec, as we told you earlier, the city of Montreal has also declared a state of emergency due to the increasing threat of flooding. Unrelenting rain there is adding to the already swollen rivers. So far, a dozen homes in the city's Pierrefonds district have been identified as needing to be evacuated immediately. And then we have a scene over in Lachute, a 2-hour drive northwest of Montreal. The community there is completely surrounded by water. Elsewhere in Quebec, Rigaud's fire chief ordered all residents living in flooded areas to leave within 24 hours. Water levels there are at a 100-year high. And with more rain in the forecast this weekend, as we've been reporting throughout the show already, new records will likely be set. As well, near the Ottawa River, Belle Falls Dam in Quebec's Laurentians is at risk of failure. Dozens of people have been forced to leave their homes in that area, but officials are still confident the dam will withstand the never-before-seen levels. Flood-stricken communities across 3 provinces are nervously watching the sky and the forecast this weekend. Rising flood levels are expected to worsen with heavy rain anticipated over the next 2 days. The federal government is providing some assistance in the affected communities. According to Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale, more than 1,000 soldiers are helping with the flood in Quebec. 310 are in New Brunswick and about 400 are on the ground here in Ottawa. But what about the long term? Should affected homeowners expect any financial assistance from the feds? Karen McCrimmon is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, and she joins me in studio now. Hi, Ms. McCrimmon. Nice to see you. Wish it were under better circumstances, but I appreciate your time today. You also represent the riding of Kanata-Carleton, one of the hardest hit ridings in this area, essentially in the area around Ottawa for people who are watching outside of this region. You just came from
That's
there.
right.
Paint us a picture of what things are like at this moment.
Well, especially today with that heavy rain, of course, that worries people even more. And the latest forecasts do not look good. The latest forecasts indicate it could be as high as half a meter higher than the 2017 floods. So that's very frightening for people. You know, they're worried not only about their property, but the safety of their families and whether they're going to have to be evacuated. And so it's a lot of concern, but they're all out there soaking wet in that rain, filling sandbags. They're not about to give up.
We just heard from the City of Ottawa. They held a press conference in which they said that they are preparing for a voluntary evacuation in West Carleton. Tell me a bit about your feelings on that and how that might proceed.
Well, there's already some people who have had to abandon their homes. There have also been homes where the gas and the electricity, for safety reasons, has already been turned off, so that they know that their pumps, if they had electric pumps, it's not going to preserve their homes. So some of them had to leave already. So they know what it feels like, but they really do feel that they're being listened to, and I think that's important. The decision by the city to call in the Canadian Forces, I think, was a really good one, very timely. You have to understand that West Carleton has suffered 3 natural disasters in 3 years. Floods of 2017, the tornadoes of 2018, and now 2019 flooding again, and there is a certain fatigue there right now. But when they saw the military showed up and they just jumped right in. It was amazing. It gave people a lot of confidence.
And that military particularly has gone to Constance Bay, obviously in your riding as well. You were actually in the military and you participated in these kind of relief efforts for floods. Tell us a bit about what those members of the military are doing right now to try and stem the tide.
Well, they can bring a lot of skills to bear. And I think one of the biggest one is strategic planning. They're used to dealing with complex kind of challenges like this, of a broad scope, and getting a series of individuals, players working as a team. That's probably their biggest strength. And they have specialized skills and specialized equipment that we don't have in the civilian world. So when they show up and they want to be part of the team, I was really impressed this morning. They showed up and said, okay, what role do we play here? Who are the experts? Who knows how this works? And instead of taking over, they brought a team together. They brought all the different agencies that were kind of trying to do something, but it wasn't integrated. They brought them all together and said, how do we work together to do the best we possibly can?
Premier Ford is also here today, and he was talking to reporters earlier in the day, discussing the possibility of compensation or incentivizing people to move out of a home that they are in, that is in basically a flood zone. Because what we do know is that though last year we were talking about this as a 1 in 100 year occurrence, it's happening again this year. Is the federal government supportive of what Premier Ford and Premier Legault have talked about in that idea of incentivizing people to move out?
Well, we have, first of all, I mean, if this is what the province wants to do, I think there's some wisdom in it. We have climate change mitigation funds available. We have climate change adaptation funds available, and we want to see those funds taken more advantage of. They haven't been.
Would those funds ever be directed towards, for example, compensation, though?
Well, how it works right now is prearranged agreements between the federal government and the provincial government. So if the costs get to a certain point, I think there's room for negotiations. But the province is first. They're the ones who have to put the money forward, and then the federal government will step in and augment those funds if it reaches a certain threshold.
And what is the threshold? Because Premier Ford did talk about asking the federal government for help when it comes to that specific ask of compensation.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that the scope of this disaster right now would not reach that threshold.
It would not?
No, I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it's based on a per capita amount of money for each citizen of the province. So I think for Ontario, the last thing I heard was somewhere over $40 million. And so once it goes above that level, then there's negotiations between the province and the federal government to determine what further monies could be made available.
And just to be clear, that money isn't just to fix things that are broken, but it could be used in this idea of compensation or of moving people from homes that lie in floodplains, basically.
This is where the negotiations with the provinces often get interesting. But I think we do realize, because we put, I think it was $2.2 billion aside to deal with climate change mitigation and adaptation. So we know there's work to be done there.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. McCrimmon. I appreciate it. Best of luck over the weekend in your riding.
Thanks so much, Vashi.
I think it's important. We cannot have every year compensation to solve problems. We really need to have incentives to move the people.
Well, I think we've got to look seriously at the impacts that we're seeing with changing weather conditions and how we evaluate building sites and how we encourage people to actually relocate.
These folks can't go through this every single year. I think it was 2017 it happened.
Correct.
And they say it's 100-year storms. Well, it's a few years later and we're back in the same boat.
As 3 provinces grapple with severe flooding right now, debate has resurfaced over how to stop this from becoming an annual problem. Flooding is already Canada's most expensive kind of natural disaster, and it's only expected to get worse. So how can communities and individuals adapt? Yesterday, I spoke to Blair Feltmate, head of Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation at the University of Waterloo. He was in Toronto. Hi, Mr. Feltmate. Nice to see you. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, happy to be here.
Can I just start by asking you, as we've, for the past few days, been reporting on all the sort of different levels of crisis throughout this province and New Brunswick and Ontario, what has been going through your head as you watch that?
Well, there's no question that the problems pertaining to flooding that have been here for a while, they're going to get more challenging going forward. And we need to prepare very rapidly to take risk out of the system relative to future flood events. So we need to speed up the degree to which we deploy adaptation to deal with these extreme weather events.
In layman's terms, what does preparing to take risk out of the system mean?
It means when large volumes of precipitation come down over short periods of time, which is happening increasingly so due to climate change, we have to look at how can we prepare Canadians to not end up with all that water, for example, in the basement of their house. The number one cost to Canada by far due to climate change and extreme weather risk is flooding, and specifically flooding basements. So we need to work with Canadians, homeowners, to give them information on how they can best protect their home from not having a flooded basement. And then at the level of communities, we need to put measures in place that will further contribute to communities not flooding out. Now, that's not a categorical guarantee that at some level, if you have Noah's flood, you'll get flooded out. But there's an awful lot that can be done between zero precipitation and Noah's flood, where we can take a tremendous amount of risk out of the system.
What are some examples of what can be done?
Well, at the level of the community, we need to look at vulnerable communities in particular to flooding and examine in the clear light of day when you're not in the middle of a flood, how can we use berms diversion channels, holding ponds, cisterns, bioswales deployed strategically within communities to give to direct water to safe locations when indeed the heavy waters come, and to hold water there safely in those lake locations and allow it to discharge downstream slowly afterwards. So we can divert water to safe locations to a much greater degree than we're currently doing. And then that's at the community level. And then at the level of the individual house, there's a lot people can do to lower the chances of ending up with a flooded basement. And it's as simple as, for example, disconnecting the downspout that comes from your eaves trough system. If that disappears into the ground, put an elbow on it, direct water 2 or 3 meters away from the foundation of the house. Put plastic covers over window wells for windows that are at ground level to make it such that when the big storms hit, the water doesn't fill the window well and subsequently flow into the basement. Windows at grade level should be watertight, so if water does get up to the window, it doesn't enter into the basement. And then within the basement itself, for example, if you have a sub pump, first of all, check the sub pump to make sure it works, that it's not seized up. Pour a bucket of water in the sump well and see if the sump pump turns on and discharges water. There should be 2 sub pumps, because very often sub pumps will quit during elongated periods of running. We need battery backup supply for sub pumps, which, by the way, costs about $200 at any retail store, so that when the big storms hit and if the electricity goes out, which it often does, or the local town has to shut off electricity so people don't become electrocuted, we can run the sub pumps with battery backup supply for up to 3 or 4 days. People should have a plumber in to look at their basement for the little drain on the basement that's normally there for if the dishwasher overflowed and you want the water to go out. Well, during the big storms, water can overwhelm sewer systems and back up through that system and flow into your basement, sewer backup flooding. We can put a valve on those discharge lines to make it such that water can flow out of the basement versus coming in. So there's an awful lot we can do at the level of the community and the individual house to lower the probability of flooding being problematic.
So who should be spearheading that? Is that a level of government, for example? Where does the burden of responsibility fall in spearheading it at a sort of, at a wider level than just individuals?
It should come from a variety of sources. There should be, at the national level, there should be a national campaign to educate homeowners on what they can do around their house to prevent or lower the probability of having a flooded basement along the lines of the simple measures I've just described. That effort can be reinforced by both the provincial governments and the municipalities. The insurance industry, particularly the property and casualty insurance sector, is reaching out a lot to homeowners to educate them on what they can do to lower the probability of flooding in their basements. I think the banks have to get involved in this file. In other words, when you go to get a mortgage, it should be a requirement that your house is assessed relative to the probability of basement flooding by a qualified inspector, to give direction to the homeowner who is about to make his or her biggest investment in life for most people in their retirement fund. Is there something I should be concerned about this house that could give me pause as to whether I buy it or not? And at the very top of the list should be, is this house subject to basement flooding? The bank should be demanding that disclosure, and real estate agents should be better equipped to discuss this file with their clients.
All right, a lot of food for thought. Thank you very much, Mr. Feltmate. I appreciate your time today.
You're very welcome.